Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And for those who are watching from different time zones, good morning or good evening. And for my guest today, it's going to be good morning since he's based in Switzerland. So, my name is Marilyn for those who are first time in our show or in our platform. And I'm the founder and CEO of Customized Training Solutions Private Limited or CTS. And we are passionate about helping leaders and organizations who are continuous learners and action takers to transform and thrive in all aspects by co creating customized programs with the help of our world class resources. We have served over 3,000 leaders from over 30 countries in different industries, and that includes Petronas, Sony Mobile, PruLife UK, Ayala Group, Chevron, Tencent, Jollibee Foods Corporation, and Shell, to name a few. Experts say that the pandemic will last for the next 3 to 5 years. And this is why we are organizing several interventions, including this interview, to help leaders who don't know how to stay relevant and adapt to the new normal, those who find it stressful to lead and ensure performance of a remote team, and for those who are afraid that you can't keep your team and or business. So, to be able to stay relevant and continue to lead effectively in any situation, do join us in our several interventions that we arrange or organize for you. And so today, it's my great pleasure to introduce our leader, Guy Oxnard. And this is, I believe, the first time we're interviewing a lawyer or a general counsel. So he is an experienced executive leader, general counsel, company secretary, and head of compliance. He navigates the complexity of law and the labyrinths of business relationships and infrastructures and energy sectors. He creates painkillers for the headaches of founders, projects build ups, and scale ups so they can safely focus on growth and success. He counsels executives and entrepreneurs on the importance of establishing a firm foundation of business relationships and structures, leveraging his expertise in designing contractual structures, joint ventures, partnership management and governance, negotiation skills, and utilizing soft influence in business relationship. Guy manages relationships with external lawyers and advisors to help businesses get best value from them. So without so much further ado, I'd like to bring in Guy. Hi Guy, good morning.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's 8:30 here in Switzerland. I'm in the middle of the Alps, surrounded by beautiful views and lots of sunshine, but unfortunately not enough snow yet.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for bringing us to Switzerland for a few seconds there, Guy. And of course, I'm in Singapore and it's a hot, sunny day today. I'm glad that train has stopped just now. And yeah, so our conversation will be revolving around leadership, transforming, thriving together in this next normal, as I've said in the introduction. And basically, the first three questions I will ask you is for us to be able to have a better understanding on from which perspective are you coming from. And for the 4 to 6 question will likely be around the meaty part or juicy part of this conversation, I would say. And the last two questions is your chance to answer the two Miss Universe questions. So to start with, I'd like you to share like with your leadership experiences. If you do have a favorite leadership style and probably influencers that you'd like to share with us, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you for that. Those of you who are, well, you're listening to me and hearing my voice and probably not being able to determine from my accent where I come from. Most people get confused. Many people think I'm Irish or Canadian, which I'm not. I've lived in a number of places, and I started out with a career in shipping in America. I worked as a ship's officer, but then I went to Australia and went to law school there and worked at a big law firm there. And it's there where I think I learned the management style, that the management culture that I like, that I've sort of practiced for my career after I've come to Europe. And Australia, it's meant to be an egalitarian place. It's whether or not it is or not is a different question. But in a work setting, people, they like to be on first names with everybody, even the CEO or the chairman. You go up to him and say, "Hi, John, how you doing?" And it's a very friendly, open, and an office that doesn't have that sort of friendly, open atmosphere often is struggling. And so I've learned from that. For me, since then, it's been extremely important for me to develop relationships, good relationships with my coworkers and with my bosses and with the people who report to me. So it's very much about personal connection, personal relationship. It's not so much about hierarchy. I tend not to be impressed by someone simply because they have a big title or a corner office. It's about the person. And I've been influenced by a past boss who was like that, very quiet and very self-effacing, but also very effective and incredibly good at motivating people because of the way he went about things in a quiet way, and also because he gave people responsibility and he expected them to deliver. And because of his style and because he delegated, people generally did deliver. And that was a really good lesson for me. I've also been influenced by a bunch of bosses. I've had many bosses, and I can't say that most of them were good. In fact, I think most of them were not very good bosses because they were too busy doing the work and not busy enough thinking about the people.
Wow, that's
So,
amazing. Thank you, Guy, for bringing us through your experience. And I would say, like, we more or less would understand then the answer for the next questions. And what I like about what you've said is really that you've mentioned about being busy. Forgetting about the people that you're working with, and again, like, as a leader, the most important thing, or most important focus that we should have is really our people, right? And obviously that most of us would base how we actually respond, or how we gain our perspective based on the experiences we have with both, not so good one
mhm.
bosses, as you mentioned, and of course those who have actually managed to inspire us during the experience. And it's amazing that that in your case, like, your experience is so I would say varied in terms of working in different cultures, because you've worked in different countries as well. So thank you so much for bringing us through your experience as a leader. And so that leads me to my next question. What is leadership for you, having said, those experiences?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to say, I think leadership is a hugely overused word. And I think many people aspire to be leaders, but many people fail to become leaders. And so for me, what leadership is, it's about building a team and working with a team and improving a team. It's about motivating the team. And it's not about acting, for me at least, it's not about working alone to make change. It's not about doing everything on your own in the hope that others will recognize what you do and emulate you. For me,
Mhm.
it's about working very much with people. Um, and yeah, so for me, I've always thought to be successful, I myself don't have to be successful. What I
Mhm.
need to do to be successful is to build a really good team of really good people who are all really successful themselves. And if they're good, then that reflects well on me because I'm the one who created the team, I'm the one who leads the team. So I've
Mhm.
always been very much about putting a lot of effort into the hiring process, finding the right people, focusing particularly on soft skills to build a team that fits together. And then once I have the right people, it's about giving them responsibility, giving them authority, because you have to have both. You can't have responsibility without authority. That just doesn't work. And my experience has been that people succeed. And part of the reason they succeed is if the team is cohesive, they want to succeed because it not only reflects well on them, it reflects well on the whole team. And then it reflects on me as the leader, and it reflects well on the organization as a whole. So leadership is about working with people and developing their skills.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Again, like what you mentioned earlier, it's all about working with people and caring for them, right? And at the end of the day, our purpose as a leader is to build and improve team or leaders as well, right? And like I think that's also the huge I don't know if I should use the word challenge, but more often than not, in most organizations, this is sometimes like the most important things they have to look into, and yet they forget about, right? So thank you for reminding us that it's all about building and improving a team, right? So I mentioned in the introduction earlier as well that there are like challenges for most leaders in terms of like the fast changes that are happening, and some of them are due to the pandemic and what I would say we call the next normal, right? So if I were to ask you, how would you define and describe the next normal?
Well, I think I'm in a slightly unusual situation because I left my job in London and got back to Switzerland 1 week before the pandemic started, really kicked in, and all of the restrictions started. And I had decided to take a sabbatical anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was relatively unaffected by all of the changes in the world. And in
Right.
fact, I had a fantastic 2020. I'm probably one of the few people who can say that because I had chosen not to work, and I wanted the time to reflect and think a little bit about things. And it gave me the opportunity to sort of look at the world, the new world, from a kind of objective distance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what that means is that I didn't have to all of a sudden start working 12 hours from home. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to deal with all of the challenges that the people who work from home have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And I've slowly developed into that because I no longer work as a full time employee. I work as a consultant now, and that means a lot more flexibility and time. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm been easing back into working from home on a number of different projects, getting used to in the last 6, 12 months all of the Zoom calls, which the rest of the world has been doing for the last 18 months. And I think having spoken with lots of friends, having looked at and read about the way people are having to work, what it's all about is flexibility and trust. Because in the past, the old days, nobody got to work from home because all the bosses thought if they work from home, they'll spend the day skiving off, they'll be watching Netflix, they won't actually be working. We only can get the best out of people if they sit right in front of us and we can keep an eye on them all day long. And of course, that's not the case. So it's a lot of people like working at home. They don't like the commute. A lot of people miss being in an office. So I think the answer to the new normal is the flexibility of working at home at times, working in the office when needed, but most of all, everybody recognizing that this is okay. This is acceptable. This is the way of the future. We don't have to commute every day. And it will be interesting to see what kind of effect that has on central business districts, because there must be higher vacancy rates now than there have been in the past, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So yeah, it's about flexibility and acceptance and trusting your colleagues to do the right thing.
And I've actually remembered a few times that trust is being really challenged, I would say, um, or like has been like most of the issue for organizations, right? Because again, like most people are used to working in the office, and a lot of times traditional leaders would always think that presence or physical presence for that matter is equal to productivity, which is not the case, right? Like what you've mentioned, it's all about the flexibility. Um, and again, that could be a challenge for some of people that haven't realized how is it possible, right? Yeah. And
Exactly.
again, that's a question of like what you've said, trust in within the organization or within workplaces, which has been always the issue for most now that that quite a number of companies are working on a remote type of basis. And I would say that it's both a silver lining as well and an opportunity to understand that, hey, we actually can do that, right? We can still encourage performance, productivity, and we can still produce results even, people are working in different locations, in fact, or on a remote setting, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So um I believe that, on top of what we are, sharing now, that on the next normal, for sure, as a corporate leader yourself, and now working with business owners and other corporate leaders, um there would be, like, problems that they faced even, before the pandemic, right? Before, or even during, and mostly now that, we're into these interesting times. So what would you say would be the top three problems that they normally face?
Well, following on from what I just said, I think a real big problem is when people who want to be leaders or who think they're leaders
Mm-hmm.
don't actually give responsibility and authority to the people who report to them. And I think often this happens because perhaps they're not quite sure of the capabilities of the people under them, and they don't quite trust that the job will be as good as they want it to. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people think, if I want it done right, I better do it myself. But I think there's a more fundamental problem, which is that some people don't delegate because they're afraid of the person they're delegating to actually doing a better job than they will. And they
Mm-hmm.
will be made to look bad by a team member who's performing really well. And like I said earlier, I've always had the opposite thought. If my team member performs really well, if my team member is a star, that makes me a star. And
True.
so people who aren't willing to delegate and take the risk that their team member will actually outperform them, that says something interesting about them. Is it a
Mm-hmm.
lack of confidence? Is it not a fear of their own abilities? And I suppose if you are a boss and you've promoted someone below you who's showing an inability to delegate, then perhaps you've promoted the wrong person. And that's the theme I think I'll probably come back to. Um, Another problem is promoting people for the wrong reason. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess what that means is the person who gets the promotion is often the best technical person, the best
Mm-hmm.
lawyer, the best accountant, the best engineer. But that doesn't mean they're the best manager. That doesn't mean they're the
True.
most empathetic person with the most emotional intelligence. That doesn't mean they're the ones who have the capability to actually lead a team. All it means is that they're a good lawyer or a good accountant or a good engineer. And so it's really important not to look at the technical skills of the person, but to think about their human qualities and whether they are the ones to motivate and whether they can actually become leaders in their own right at some point. And then the third problem I see is when if you want to be a leader and not just a manager, then you need to step back occasionally and look at the big picture. And you have to always question the assumptions and make sure you're always heading in the right direction because it's so easy to get set on a track and go a long way down that track and then realize when it's way too late that you've just been heading in the wrong direction. And so this is not a people point, which I've mostly been speaking about. This is the point of the leader being introspective, looking around, stepping back, taking the time to really think about the big picture. And I think that's crucial.
Wow. Thank you for simplifying all those three problems. And again, these are problems that leaders do face even before the pandemic, I would say, right?
Yes,
And delegating is really crucial. To be a leader, you have to be able to have someone to delegate uh, your work with, to be the CEO of, your life as well, right? It's important that you know how to delegate and trust. Again,
it's
you've
true.
mentioned earlier trust, or in the earlier answer that you had, and again, that could be a trust issue as well. You don't want to um, like delegate because of the trust, and most importantly what you've said is that, the ego part that, comes up along the way, and that's kind of like, I would say, quite common in most leaders today, being so afraid that, oh, maybe, they would think that I'm uh, I'm inferior to my team because he can do better or whatnot, right? And again, it's not really that it's wrong to promote. You mentioned about promoting for the wrong reason, but it's not really like promoting the individual contributors because of its technical skills. But I think it's more of preparing them before you promote them, right? I don't know if you will agree with that, but I think it's more on the organization being able to equip those individual contributors to be able to lead team, because again, those are two different things. Your
It's true. And
technical.
I think if you are a perfect leader, if you are really good at what you do, then you
Mhm,
should be able to put your feet up on the desk every afternoon at 2 o'clock because you
mhm.
have a team that's running everything perfectly. I've ever never actually met a perfect leader who can put his feet up on the desk every afternoon at 2 o'clock, but that's always been my goal.
Yes, yes, true. And it's I would say it's all about like what that's I guess what most company are missing out as well. It's really more of like how can you actually prepare your leaders to be
Mm,
able to handle people and take care of the people, so there will be like continuity. One of the things that I've always seen as well is like succession planning as well, right? How who will take over eventually, because I want to keep this position for myself, right?
mm,
So those kind of things I would say. I mean, and obviously we don't want to leave them with the problems, right? And we want to give them like a solution, or at least um I would say like some of the important leadership skills or capabilities that they must have in this next normal to be able to continue to lead effectively, or even
mhm,
without the pandemic, I would say, because the problems that you've shared with us are obviously has been there for the longest time, right?
mhm. Exactly.
So my next question is like, what do you believe, or what are the important leadership capabilities or skills leaders must have so that they are able to continue to lead effectively in this next normal?
Well, I think there are lots of skills needed to be a leader, but
Mm-hmm.
following on from what we've just been discussing, what I've just been saying, I
Mm-hmm.
think the important one is to be able to trust people.
Mm-hmm.
And that means
That's
you have
big.
to build trust because trust doesn't come necessarily on the first day that someone starts a new job. You have to
Mm-hmm.
work with a person, you have to learn to understand each other's styles, and you have to come to trust the person on your team. In fact, everybody on your team, and they all
Mm-hmm.
have to come to trust you. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have to trust the people in your executive team as well. And without that trust, the company's always going to be dysfunctional. I guess there are some cultures where the way people work is not based on trust and the personal sort of relationships, which I've described coming from my Australian experience.
Mm-hmm.
Some
Mm-hmm.
in some places it's all based on hierarchy and seniority and the position. And if someone is the boss, no matter how good or bad he is, then you do what he says without question. And I've worked a little bit in that sort of culture. I find that difficult because for me the individual is so important. Another skill that I think you need is the ability to see that when somebody makes a mistake, that's not a failure. It might be a failure on the day, but in the long run, they've made a mistake and most people learn from it. And so, therefore, learning from mistakes and
Mm-hmm.
not doing them again is a success because it means that people are growing and developing. So, yeah, you don't crush somebody because they've made a mistake. You work with them to make sure it doesn't happen again. You work with them to see what happened, why it happened, and you both learn from the mistake and you find a better way forward. It's not a failure. It's okay to
Mm-hmm.
make mistakes. When someone makes the same mistake twice, that's starting to look bad. When they make the same mistake three times, then that's actually really pretty bad. And that
Mm-hmm.
reflects upon the leader because if a boss is letting a team member make the same mistake a number of times, that's a management failure. That's not a
Mm-hmm.
personnel failure.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And I remember like we have several times actually discussed this topic on psychological safety, which is building trust and building that opportunity for the team to make mistakes, to open up, to share their ideas, right? And that's really like, I mean, for us as a leader, it's really a huge thing, not only in building trust but also in creating an innovative, creative type of environment within the team. And so I really appreciate that, you started and you came back again with that part on trust. And again, see a good reminder for leaders to look at mistakes and failures, in terms of how can you learn from it, right? And like what actually success is, like what you've said, it can produce in, in the future, right? And I think this is like a lot of times has been, missed or forgotten, because more often than not, I mean, that's where we, like, from these mistakes, that where we actually learn and, get to improve on things, right? It's important to always do test and learn. That's what we do as a like in my case as a marketer.
Mhm.
It's always about testing and, learning from it and improving it, fine tuning everything, the strategies. And and if you come from the position of service, right, to others, then that would really like make a difference in terms of how you make decisions, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So and we've talked about leadership and several times, and for sure, like I've made mention as well, the importance of training for for leaders, or for them to transition from individual contributor um, to a leader, right? So what do you believe is the role of learning, leadership and transformation in order to thrive in the next normal?
Yeah, that's, I have to say, one of the most wide open questions I've ever heard. Um, and I don't quite know how to answer it other than to say it's about flexibility,
Mm-hmm.
flexibility at all levels in all areas, because the world is changing. The pace of change is increasing every day. And the whole pandemic experience has been just an enormous change. And now I'm going to get a little bit political here, and I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the rise of populism and the rise of support for authoritarianism, in my opinion, comes from an increasing number of people not being equipped to deal with change. And so they just want to stop the clock. They want a big, strong leader to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, no more changes. I'm going to control everything. You guys just sit back and relax. It's all okay. And the world has become a scary place
Mm-hmm.
in a whole bunch of different countries because of the rise of populism, the rise of authoritarianism. And so I think the answer to that is there has to be flexibility, flexibility in thinking, flexibility in learning, flexibility in understanding other people, accepting that they might have a different viewpoint, but still nevertheless finding a way to deal with it and move on. And I'm not sure if that's the kind of answer you were anticipating, but it's such an open question, it could go anywhere.
Wow. I actually never anticipated any answer. I'm just curious to learn from you and to learn your perspective. And that's always what I do whenever I do the interview, right? And it's interesting to get like several perspective as well. And like, we've mentioned earlier as well that, gone are the days where like people would just listen to leaders and not able to, like, that's why we speak about trust and psychological safety earlier, right? And that's because gone are the days when um it's effective that, you just dictate the direction, or like, again, like being aus- authoritarian or authoritarianism tendencies, like what you said. Sorry about that. So yeah, so I mean, um, gone are the days when you have to dictate everything that your people has to do, because they have their own brains. They have they you hire people for you for them to help you, right? And so let them do their let them shine. Let them do their work, right?
Mhm.
So I mean,
Exactly.
that's at least what I get from like how you uh described it. And again, like, even though we don't want to really touch so much on the government side, but I mean, from what we see, that most countries who are doing well as well, in this interesting times, is those who are actually able to listen and communicate well with their people, right? And look into having that empathy, having that consideration that my people has to be safe, and I have to help, I have to serve. No, it's not really about how much do I earn from
Mhm.
this COVID-19 situation, right? So yeah, so, and again, it's all about flexibility. The I mean, that's the game now. It's really being more flexible, agile, or adaptive in the changes that are happening, because if you don't do that, then you're gonna be really left behind, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, I appreciate all those perspective. It's very interesting, and I'm sure it will be more interesting with my open questions. I would say the two last questions, which is shifting gear in terms of like what else, what more, right? So if you have a magic wand and can use it, what will you do with it?
Okay, well, we're speaking about well, I'm speaking about the big corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've seen and what has always continues to surprise me is how many decisions are made, how many actions are taken because the people at the top have big egos. And
Yeah.
I mean, the people at the top of big organizations and also the people at the top of governments, ministers and prime ministers, and the decision makers, both in the public and private sector. And
Mm-hmm.
I suppose you could say that if you don't have a big ego, you're not going to be the successful, ambitious person who fights his way to the top. But there's so much that hangs upon some person in a pinstripe suit saying, "I don't like that. I want to do something else," even if it's a bit irrational. So my magic wand would be to take away ego-driven behavior from the
Mm-hmm.
corporate world. And I mean, that's a ridiculous wish because egos are what get people to high places. Egos and ambition, it all goes together. And I suppose you could look at someone like Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, who apparently was an unbelievably egocentric person, but he nevertheless changed the world. And so you don't want to get rid of people like him. But for ordinary mid and senior level managers in the corporate world, if they could put their egos aside and think about what's good for the business, what's good for the people around me, my team, my colleagues, the people I report to, and not always think what's best for me as their
True.
first thought. That's what I would do with my magic wand.
Wow, I love what you've shared, and I wish you actually have a magic wand. Let me give one to you. Just kidding. I mean, like, again, the problem would always be like, starts with um the ego, like what you've said. And yeah, I think it will be a better place if we actually get rid of this, or take away, take this, or remove this ego, like what you've mentioned. Yeah. So, and that, thank you so much for that, and I hope you really have a magic wand that you can use. But for sure, with the things that you do now, I mean, being a consultant and helping more business owners, entrepreneurs, and corporate leaders as well, in your journey to making like better structures, I would say, or creating the things, the right things before they even start the business, or like, I mean, make it better in terms of the structure, and the governance, and the way they utilize their influence, right, in the business or in their business relationship. So hopefully that would really, like, help in making this uh, uh, removing ego driven behavior
Mhm.
of your magic wand takes into reality, right? I hope so.
Hope so too.
Yeah. So that leads me to my last question.
Mhm.
So if you were to ask yourself a question that you can best answer, what would it be?
Well, I see this question as a plug, which for myself, which goes back to the introduction you gave at the beginning. Um, which the question that I'm good at answering is how to get the best out of business relationships. And now I'm not
Mhm,
talking about relationships between people within an organization, because I've spoken
mhm,
about that a lot. I'm talking about relationships between businesses. So with a joint venturer, with a supplier, with a banker, with a
mhm,
customer. And even though I talk about relationships between businesses, at the end of the day, those are all relationships between people, because you don't talk to a bank, you talk to a bank manager. You don't talk to a joint venture partner, you talk to the joint venture asset manager within the company. So it's about human relationships. But the starting point, and I say this from my background of a lawyer, is always going to be the agreement between the two companies, the contractual
mhm,
relationship. But a contract, it's only a starting point, it's a skeleton. And to put the meat on the bone, you have to get beyond what the contract says and develop a relationship with the person, with your counterparty, with the human being at the other end of the email chain, or the other end of the telephone, or the other end of the conference table. And so, what I enjoy doing, what I think I'm good at, is planning those relationships by helping businesses develop really strong contracts from the start, and then implementing the contracts, which in often cases means taking a lot of time to understand the business objectives of the person that you're talking to the asset manager or the bank manager, to understand what does his employer or her employer want, but also what does he or she want personally at a personal level. So the that's how I would answer your question of what I can well answer is how to help people in their external business relationships.
mhm. Wow, wow, that's amazing. And I've always knew that this is going to be an amazing conversation. And I hope we get to inspire more people in terms of how they have to, like, give more importance with people, building relationships with them, like what you've mentioned, and structuring their business in such a way it will be always be a win-win situation for everyone who's gonna be part of this JV or business relationship, as you've mentioned. And I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for all your wonderful perspective. I would say it's very people centric and yet very straightforward in terms of how you have communicated it. And thank you so much for giving so much clarity in terms of this. And it's very interesting. Like, I mean, I've always expected something like talking about the laws and all those stuff when I talk to lawyers. But you've actually shown us how much leadership you have and experience you had in the past, and now that you're running your own consulting. So thank you so much for this interview, Guy, and we definitely have learned so much from you. And thank you everyone for those who are actually watching us live or will be watching us later on. And do join us in this journey to create opportunity through several interventions and creating this world a better place to live in, right? So, and do remember that even the richest investors in the world say that investing in yourself is the best investment that you can ever make in your life. So, with that, we would like to leave you with this quote from Dolly Parton: if your actions create legacy that inspires you, or inspires others, I mean, to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are an excellent leader. Thank you so much, Guy, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye for
Marilyn. Thank
now.
you.
Stay
Goodbye.
safe. Bye.